Hey men, Mike Yarbrough here. Well, our beard oils have been out for sale for a little while now, and the reviews are starting to come in. Here's a 5-star review from Jasper I wanted to read to you guys real quick. Jasper says, "The real deal, period. This stuff is awesome. This is the beard oil that men have been asking for. Great scent, non-greasy feel, cool packaging. You can't go wrong picking up a bottle. Just be warned, the result of using this could warrant unwanted female attention." That is correct, sir, and it could also warrant wanted female attention, if you get what I'm saying. Guys, these beard oils have been really doing a good job of setting themselves apart from the things that are already out there on the market, and I want you guys to find out a little bit more about the story behind these, how we put these together, and to know what really makes them different. We really set out to make a better beard oil than anybody else out there, and you can find out more by going to wolfandiron.com/beard oils. Once again, that's wolfandiron.com/beard oils. Check them out. You will not be disappointed.
Duty, honor, country dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
The destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals.
Now, we are the masters of our fate.
Hey man, welcome back to another episode of the Wolf and Iron podcast. I'm your host, Mike Yarbrough, founder and curator of wolfandiron.com. And I'm so glad you're here, fellas. This is a really good conversation with Antony Cummins. He's the author of the Book of Samurai, and it's actually a series of books that are kind of coming about as these old scrolls of the samurai get translated into English, and we learn more about how the samurai operated, their mindset, their tactics in warfare, their armor, and things of that nature. And this was such a fun conversation because, as Anthony and I mentioned during the podcast, there's so much of this 80s kind of childhood and 90s childhood that comes up, and this sort of fascination with ninjas and samurai and all that. We're probably going to squash some of those things. He schooled me on a number of different areas that even stuff related to British armor and some misconceptions that we have about just ancient warfare in general. There are a lot of things that we just assume from movies and things of that nature that are really not accurate in terms of how armor was structured and how warfare was done, and even about the samurai and their mindset, things of that nature. So you guys are really going to get a lot from this, especially if you are one of those 80s and 90s kids that grew up and just love ninjas and Jean-Claude Van Damme and all the martial arts stuff that was going on back in the day. Listen, guys, before we jump into the episode, though, I want to ask you for a favor. I know many of you have been listening to the podcast for a good period of time, and I would really appreciate if you would take the time just to leave a review for the podcast. The reviews are one of the best ways to help other men find out about the podcast because it helps the podcast rank higher and that kind of stuff. It also encourages me, and it encourages the guys who read the reviews to kind of know what this podcast is about and whether it's something that they're going to connect with or not before they spend a lot of time listening to episodes and that kind of stuff. So if you don't mind, take 5 minutes of your day, go out and leave a review. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes, and I appreciate that so much. Now, without further ado, here's Antony Cummins. We're talking about samurai. Mr. Antony Cummins, thank you so much for joining me today on the Wolf and Iron podcast.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Man, I'm really excited to have gotten a copy of your book here, and this is the second book in what's going to be a series of books on the samurai, and we're going to be talking about translating the scrolls and the research that's gone into it and things of that nature. The second book that I've looked at is very technical in nature, but it's very, very detailed, and especially for those people who like to geek out on this kind of stuff, they're really going to dig it because it goes into all of the, it's called the samurai armor, and the tactics of warfare. And what I found really interesting about this book was that there's so many nuances, and there's so many details to the armor and to just the mindset that goes into the armor. And these guys are literally just draped in meaning and just their whole character, their whole being is really caught up in what it means to be a samurai. They're not just a soldier that puts on a uniform and goes out and does the fighting and then whatever. So I'm excited about this conversation, man. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. For the guys who are just tuning into this, tell us a bit about yourself and how you got started down this whole path.
Yeah, no problem. My name is Antony Cummins. I'm from the UK. I was born in Manchester, but I'm living in Wales at the moment in a dark, dank cottage in the middle of a valley. So just to get you in the sort of view. I've always been obsessed with samurai and ninja, and I, like everyone else, followed the stereotypical view of them. So I went to Japan, started to be an English teacher. And my main focus at first was translating. I don't translate. I've put together a translation team that deal with ancient manuals. And I basically realized that the ninja and the samurai are totally portrayed incorrectly in the West. So I went on this massive quest to find all the scrolls I could find. And we started by translating ninja scrolls, but they ended up finding this school, which is called Natoryu, which is a massive full war school, which we're doing at the moment as a team.
So I'm just thinking about you, young guy heading over to Japan. You're going to be an English teacher, and then like you've got these visions of like going into like ancient caves and like digging through like almost like a secret mission. Like I want to know more about the samurai. I want to like uncover these things about the ninja and these ancient battling cultures. And what was like that reception like? Being a Westerner, going over to Japan and saying, I want to look at some of, maybe even your most sacred text or these old scrolls and that kind of stuff. Was that a challenge, or did they just kind of receive you with open arms? How did that go?
It's actually quite difficult, to be fair. It was really, they're very polite, the Japanese. Yeah. But first of all, I went over there and I was one of the, it's a ninja martial art and all this. I'm going to go learn from ninjas. And when I got there, I realized it was totally wrong. I've got a master's degree in ancient history and archaeology. And when you put their information into the machine of academia, you're like, that does not compute. That's not right. So second time I went, I was like, right, I'll do it another year and I'm going to find all the scrolls. And you can find the scrolls in either a public library, which, literally like, the British Library or something like that. Or you can get it in personal collections, or you can get it in private libraries. Now, in a personal collection, I've only ever gotten 2 scrolls in 15 years, which is ridiculously small. From a private library, they have never allowed me to see it. They're like, no, but obviously public libraries do. So it is massively difficult if it's not in a public library. In fact, almost impossible. And then they look at you and like, you're not Japanese. And my translator, she's amazing. She's got a degree from a really prestigious university in translation. And they just look at her like, and you're a woman. No.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So there's no way. But they smile and they're polite and then they goodbye, However, now, after literally about the 10 years of being in the Japanese circuit, they're starting to understand and they've accepted me now, the sort of ninja and samurai community from the Japanese side.
Yeah. So when you say that kind of before we get into the research and or the details about the scrolls and stuff like that, when you talk about the ninjutsu and the samurai not being what we thought they were or how they've been portrayed in the West, right? Which is one, they can do anything. 2, they're just kind of like they're all about battle and that kind of stuff, and slicing people open and throwing stars and whatnot. What are the things that we've gotten wrong about one or both of those?
Right, okay. Well, the main ones about ninja is the fact that everybody believes it's a hand-to-hand combat system specific to the ninja, and they live on their own outside of samurai society, and they do what the samurai won't do and throw in stars and wear black masks. That's all totally wrong. The ninja are actually samurai. It's a job. It's the role of a job inside of a samurai army. It's done by samurai, and they didn't invent ninja throwing stars, and they didn't wear masks, and they're literally like propaganda, CIA agents, SAS, Navy SEALs, that type of thing mixed in. The samurai wise, everybody imagines it's these honorable men who don't sort of like, they follow to their lord to the death. These things are true, but they're ideals, and they did happen as ideals. But actually, the samurai were really brutal. In fact, the best example I can give of why we've got samurai wrong is Tokugawa Ieyasu, the shogun of all Japan. He's considered as one of the greatest samurai because he unified Japan. He actually promised his master on his deathbed that he would look after his son and put him on like the throne, if you like, or the seat of command. And when the guy died, he basically went to war, killed that son, and then butchered the entire family and took over Japan. Do you know what I mean? It was like, All right then. So, and this idea that the samurai don't retreat in battle, that's absolute nonsense. They'll die first. Nope, they've got loads of tactics on retreat. That's exactly what this series is about, is how you tactically get out of things or win.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think you're killing a lot of 80s childhood imaginations right now. So
however, I would like to say, right, guys, this happens every time. People go, "You've just killed my childhood." But when you actually research the reality, the historical reality, it's 10 times better. It's awesome.
So let's go to throwing stars just for a second, just because I thought this is kind of fun. So if the ninja didn't invent these things, where did they come from? Like at what point did these types of things that we associate with ninjutsu, especially, when did these things start to show up?
About the 1930s to the 1950s, they show up connected to the ninja. Okay. Now, you've got to be careful here because most people think that the ninja throwing stars are a secret weapon of the ninja. It's not. If you ask anybody who's practicing kenjutsu or, swordsmanship in Japan, they will tell you that throwing stars, or they're called shuriken, are actually swordsman's tools, and they're taken out thrown to distract, and then you attack with a sword. Yeah. They were in Japanese society. They definitely were there. The earliest one I found is the late 1500s. But they were not connected to, they don't appear in the ninja manuals. They were just connected in the 20th century when somebody did some comics on it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So they're not a thing of fiction. They were used differently and probably smarter than because I used to have throwing stars when I was a kid. I grew up in the country, and I finally collected some throwing stars, and I used to throw them at our barn door and just totally shredded that thing. Yep. Right? But one of the things that I found, I wasn't skilled in the ancient craft of, samurai or ninjutsu or anything like that. But one of the things that I found was that they're not super accurate at like long distances, right? But in the movies, obviously, you'd see a guy that's 50 feet away or 50 yards away, and he'd throw one and it'd go in somebody's head and stuff like that. And I thought that, or in somebody's back and kill them. I'm like, the thing's only got like a 2-inch blade. That doesn't make sense. So obviously, we knew some of those things were false from the get go. It does make more sense to use them as sort of distractions. But that's cool.
And then follow up with a 3-foot sword and hack them to death. It's pretty much how it goes.
Right. So let's talk about, just for a second, because we're talking about hacking. Are there things that we've gotten wrong, or are there things that are still in play today in terms of the tactics of a samurai, in terms of like the sword and that kind of stuff? And I'm not familiar with these things, so just so you guys know, I'm not trying to pretend like I know what I'm talking about. I have more. I'm still coming from the 90s or 80s kind of childhood like fascination with this stuff with like a lot of you guys, and so I'm just interested in learning more about this. But are there things that are still in play today that we know that the samurai did in terms of tactics of attack, or was the ancient ways of doing things very different than what we see today?
Well, this is one of my main focuses. You got to remember, guys, I was one of those 90s kids with throwing stars, headbands. I had the lot, and I'm destroying my own childhood as well. Just remember that. But basically, the samurai, even in Japan, what they do now is traditional, not historical. I'm trying to find out what's historical. Traditional are those things that have been passed on for generation after generation, but that means it's subject to change. So if you basically use the year 1600 as a cutoff point, before that is big, massive armies, going to war. Yeah. After that is a period of peace. So all the swordsmanship develops into dueling, samurais who duel because they're annoyed with each other. And so you get a totally different feel. And then after that, it becomes more of a Buddhist thing. Let's do some Zen through swordsmanship. So it totally, even though it's got its start there, it's changed. So, for example, we all think of the sword as the soul of the samurai. Yeah. That's totally, really not true. Okay. The number one weapon of the samurai is actually the bow. The samurai started as mounted archers, and their word for warfare is literally bow and arrow, really. And they prize the bow, or skill with a bow. But then warfare become much more close combat, if you like, and then it becomes the spear. And the spear is absolutely the number one samurai tool for most of its time. In fact, the best place you can be on a battlefield, also not the best place, the most prestigious place is called Ichiban Yari, the first spear, the guy who's up there with the spear. And even after that, anybody who was of a high ranking status would have a spear carried before them. And so we say, oh, only the samurai carried 2 swords. Well, actually, anybody could carry 2 swords until the samurai banned that after pretty much towards the end of the war.
Yeah.
So we have this big mix-up about the sword being the height of the samurai. Like, no, actually, almost anybody could wear it, and it was only later on that happened, and most of it became ritualistic swordsmanship, not actual swordsmanship.
That's interesting. That's really interesting, especially the part about the bow and being on horseback and that kind of stuff. I mean, we have images of that, right? When we in terms of their the paintings and stuff like that, we see that all the time. And actually, I think we see probably far more of those than we do of the samurai and kind of mano a mano. 2 guys locked in a sword fight or something like that. So it usually is these kind of scapes of these, the paintings are usually these larger landscapes of battle going on and a lot of bows and spears and things like that taking place. So that's interesting.
Yep, it basically harks back to their chivalric time, if you like. You can cut the samurai into 3 time periods if you really want to make it basic. It's the sort of horseback archers of chivalric times. The very much the sort of crushing, let's go to war like a Roman army middle period. And then you've got the peaceful, let's all walk around with like our hands in our, kimono with grass in our mouth and look cool, walking around the countryside. They're your 3 basic points of samurai history.
So let's talk about the samurai in comparison to other cultures at the time and the battle strategies, the tactics that they had. When I look at samurai armor, I go, this stuff is smart. They're able to move around. There's some flexibility there. The vital places are covered up, but they still have the ability to kind of move, as compared to an ancient knight, which is just he's just walking around in steel, which is not helpful. Protective, and that's nice, but he's not able to move around. But in comparison, just kind of across the board there, like. If you've got samurai, where do they kind of sit in relation to superiority or not for other cultures of the same age?
Right, well, I hope you don't mind this, but I'm going to destroy that as well. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Right. Basically, they've proven now by a long shot that field armor for the Western was very flexible. You can do handstands in it. You can do somersaults. They can pretty much do it. Wow. Where that comes from, that myth, is because the Victorians started producing copy armor and they didn't know how to do it. So it was really heavy and they made copy swords, because they were very much into the, the Wagner and all that. And let's go all medieval. And actually, that was a mistake. It's well proven now that armor is excellent. And not only that, it even says in this book they prefer Western armor. The Japanese loved Western armor. They thought it was excellent.
You're not just saying this because you're British, right? This is not like
no.
Okay.
No, it actually says the steel you should get should be from this province, except if you can get Western barbarian steel, because it's by far the best. Not awesome. Only that. Oh, yeah, and not only that, like I told you about Tokugawa Ieyasu and all those, they actually ordered Western armor to come in, and samurai wore Western armor, believe it or not. They did. They used to wear the conical Spanish helmets, but they put samurai neck guards on them, and they used to wear Spanish breastplates. And some of them ordered like bulletproof armor, which was multi-layered, because they just knew it was better. Yeah. But you are right, samurai armor is lighter. But the reason that this comes about, this want for the West, is because, again, all right, let me put this in context.
Okay.
The West didn't really have contact with Japan until 1500s, when some Jesuits started coming across. And this was like when the Japan is in the height of its wars. And then some Portuguese dropped off some muskets. And they were like, wow, what's this? It's like a gun. That's amazing. So they decided to buy them and then make them. And Japan became one of, if not the biggest manufacturer of guns, and that was in samurai times. And the samurai were using them, and mainly lower foot soldiers, but they were mass producing guns and they needed armor to catch up with it. Because beforehand, all the armor had to do was defend from arrows. Now it's suddenly got bullets.
Yeah.
So it started to change rapidly.
Man, that is really interesting. I mean, we do have, it just shows how many concepts that we have from movies and things like that, that have really just, that seem real to us, and it kind of makes sense. Like, oh, people were stupid back then. They had clunky armor. But then as you kind of go back and you're translating these scrolls and you're looking into the history, you find out that's not true at all. Man, that's great.
So some samurai were taught to specially swim in their armor. So if they were warfare samurai, waterborne warfare samurai, they had special skills to show them how to swim in it, or how to swim bound up and things like that.
Yeah. Man.
Oh, there's some great stuff.
So let's get into a little bit about the kind of the meaning behind their armor and so much of what they did. Because as I was looking through the book, and this is a big book, guys, it's like 400 something pages. This is book 2 of maybe 8 to 10. We don't know how many they're going to be as all the kind of the scrolls get translated here. But this is a big book, and there's a lot of information in here. One of the things that stood out to me, though, was that there was so much meaning in the armor, right? So, I mean, like and I don't know how that relates to what the British were doing, but or the Spanish or whoever it happened to be for more of this kind of traditional armor we might think about in the Western culture. But give us an idea of like just some of the meaning that was woven into the details of their armor that they had.
Yeah, no problem. So, okay, in their armor, there's sort of two sides of it. There's a practical side and there's a spiritual, religious side. So at the top of a helmet is a small hole. Now, this is there so that when you're in battle, the air doesn't build up and it's a vent so that, the air can come out. But they say that this is actually a hole for the entrance of the gods. So the samurai have little gold decorations around their helmet, which represent clouds. And that's because above there is heaven, the spiritual side. And it's said that there's a great serpent in heaven or in the, the world of the gods. And it's got 98,000 scales on its body. And this represents all the gods of war. And that all that energy goes into the hole at the top of your head and imbues the warrior with amazing power. Yeah. But at the same time, it says it's just a vent so that it doesn't sound like you're farting when you're running around and it's going on your back of your head. But then, of course, it says don't put your finger in that hole because that's where the gods reside. But underneath it says also because it'll get rusty because all the scum off your finger will go on it. So they actually have things like if you're going to take your helmet off, don't put your finger in the hole, pull it down, and never test the hole by putting your finger in it. But if you're going to commit suicide on a battlefield because you've been defeated, then you put your finger in the hole and you take your helmet off and you show the inside of your lining. And that's a visual symbol to say, right, you may cut my head off now because I give in.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and so does that kind of stuff, is there anything like that over on the Western side, like whether Spanish armor or French or British or whatever?
A little bit, but it's a little bit different in the sense of course, they had Christian, like for example, on samurai armor, you used to get Buddhist scripture or Buddhist texts or amulets. Of course, we have crosses and prayers and all of that. So yes, if you class Catholicism as a religion, as a magic, then yes, that's there as well.
Okay.
And this is the pathway to God and all that. But the samurai definitely have it a little bit different in the sense, like for example, the lacing on the samurai armor has a color and the plates have a color. Now, this is too complicated for me to explain here in full, but they are based on Taoism or Taoism, however you want to say it. And what it is the circle of creation or the cycle of creation and the circle and creation, of destruction. And this idea is that, the 5 elements, all that interact with each other. So fire is destroyed by water. But fire is generated by wood, and each one's got a color. So you have to match the color of your lacings, the color of, the sleeves, the color of everything to make sure that you're creating energy.
Yeah.
It's complicated, but it's good.
No, that's awesome. And if I'm not correct, or if I'm not wrong, when I was reading about this as well, there was a practical aspect of this too, in that it had to do with did it have anything to do with rank as well? Like seeing the colors and kind of knowing where they stood or what their role was?
Absolutely, yes. So only certain colors were allowed by certain ranks. So, for example, the color yellow or gold, which you'll always see in the Chinese emperor. The Chinese emperor always used to wear gold, and you'll see that in all the films. And basically, that's because it's represented by the element of earth in the 5-element theory, and earth is the center of all elements, which means it grounds you, and it is the center, it's the leadership. That's why they use yellow and gold.
Yeah, gotcha. That's really cool. Man, that's neat. Whenever I think about the Japanese, and especially if I think about like ancient cultures, one of the first things that comes up is just their honor. And you'd mentioned just a second ago about committing suicide on the battlefield, right? Which is in some way that's honorable to them or was honorable to them. And even we saw these kinds of things up in World War II and whatnot as well. What was the samurai's concept of honor, and did that change over the years?
Right, yes. This is a problem in both the West and the East. First of all, you have to remember that honor or chivalry or those combined are actually ideals. So what they write down and what they aspire to might not actually be what they do.
Okay.
So there's a guy called Raymond Lull who was in the 1100s, 1200s, and he was a Westerner, and he was a knight, and he wrote this book on what a knight should be. You know, the shield is the defense of truth, and the lance is the word of God, something like that.
Yeah.
Which was great, and it sounds excellent. But we all know that, you know, they were pretty much butchering each other, and let's take land.
Yeah.
So yes, samurai and the knights had honor, but it's their honor in their world. And it's got to be for them. So one of the most famous samurai is called Kusunoki Masashige. And he's so famous because he went to his death even though he knew he was going to lose the battle because he was ordered to do it. So the fact that that's an ideal means it wasn't often done.
Yeah.
And so that, because most of them left the battlefield before. There's actually, that Tokugawa Ieyasu, the number one shogun of Japan, actually left the battlefield once and apparently relieved himself in his pants. He was so scared. And because he was so scared, he had a picture drawn of this to show him like looking surprised and saying, look, we all flee the battlefield. We might try to be great, but it's just us trying. So on one hand, you've got people who absolutely did do it, like Kusunoki Masashige. He did it. And there's actually something called like sort of, it's suicide to follow your lord into death. So when your lord dies, you can say, right, I will die with him. And they actively chose to commit ritual suicide, seppuku, to follow their lord. But on the other hand, some people would never do that, and when they were forced to do it, tried to flee. So you know what I mean by seppuku and ritual suicide, the harikiri.
Yeah, I think so. It's like where they're going to stab themselves in the stomach, cut side to side or whatever, and then sometimes they'll get beheaded as well, right?
Yep, absolutely. So that what people don't realize is that some people did that voluntarily, and that's where you get this idea of like samurai die before there's any problems. But on the other hand, it was also an execution, a punishment. And people didn't want to die. Some samurai didn't want to die. So in that ritual, you actually have to sit the person who is observing it over 3 meters away or about 3 meters away, so that the person who's about to die doesn't stand up and grab the sword and start cutting his way out of there. Yeah. That's why you'll see in the films, they always wrap the blade in paper because they take the handle off so they can't fight their way out. So no, not all samurai would just go to their death willy-nilly. Most of them would not do that, but some did.
That's amazing. Good insight there. So let's back up here a little bit here in the terms of how one becomes a samurai, or how somebody would have kind of gotten indoctrinated into that culture. Because I'm thinking not everybody in Japan is a samurai, so obviously you got to go to a school or you become part of that. What does it take to, or what did it take to kind of join into that clan? Right.
Okay. So samurai is a social status. Absolutely true. It's originally a samurai was somebody, as you probably know, it means to serve. But it meant to serve the emperor. And originally they were the military defenders of the emperor, the bodyguards. And if somebody was rebelling, they would send the samurai on horseback with bows, as we talked about in their early days. But then what happened is obviously some samurai families became aristocratic because they had royal blood in them, and some were not. They were just, soldiers. But overall, a feudal system has about 10% of between 5 and 10% of warriors. So about 5 and 10% of Japan were samurai or military people. So normally you would be born into a samurai family, but also if you did well on the battlefield, you could be promoted to samurai. But what it actually means when you grind it down is how much agricultural land they own. So a samurai would have a farm. And I'm not talking a small farm. I'm talking he would own a village or a few mountains, and the farmers inside it would give him money. He would pay a certain amount, redistribute it. And instead of giving that money to his superiors, they would do military service and serve, i.e. samurai are those who serve.
Wow. So it wasn't like, once again, the movie image that we had is of like the poor kid who, just gets adopted by, whatever school and, learns how to become a ninja or a samurai or whatever the case is. And then, so it was very much like obtaining samurai was like a sort of like a status type of thing. I guess in similar way to like becoming a knight would be, you're a landed, you've got some land and that kind of stuff, and some authority and some people. Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah, most people who were poor children went into the Buddhist temples and things like that. But don't misunderstand them either. They fought as hard as the samurai. The Buddhists were all armed to the teeth. So yes, you would get the odd person who'd gone in, because they were good. They were just really good at warfare. So therefore they succeeded.
Yeah. So as somebody kind of goes into that, becomes a samurai, and they've had some battle experience, hopefully, and that kind of stuff. When do they begin to learn the things that really set them apart as samurai? Are there teachings that would be beyond just, your typical soldier, your typical foot soldier, whatever he's going to learn on the battlefield, that, like you're now at expert level and, we're going to teach you the ways of the samurai. Am I making that up? Is that a thing?
No, yeah, absolutely. The teachings are really impressive, the samurai teachings. So first of all, on a battlefield, you get samurai, which are the equivalent of knights, without a doubt. They're landed, they're the equivalent of knights. Then you get your foot soldiers, which are called ashigaru, which are literally like, they will do 6 to 8 weeks, say, of the year, military service. Yeah. And they're your foot soldiers, the pikes. So if you are a samurai and you're being brought up a samurai, you're absolutely taught from childhood, like how to be a samurai. It's the same as we have, it's obviously not the same as African child soldiers, but you have to think of it like that. These kids are brought up and they'll be executing people by the time they're 10 years old. Jeez. They practice executing dogs. They practice shooting on dogs. They used to send them off into scary situations. And one of the famous ones, you must have heard of him, is Hattori Hanzo, from Kill Bill. Yeah. He was a real samurai in the 1500s, and he was supposedly an expert in ninjutsu, which, you can't dispute that, but some people do. But my point is it's recorded that he's a samurai and he went on a ninja mission at the age of 16. In fact, he led it as a captain. So imagine being 16 and leading a mission into enemy territory in night at 16.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely.
So these guys are massively well trained, and you will learn lower level things, but believe it or not, the lower level things are actually hand-to-hand combat, military arts, swordsmanship. They say they're the lower elements. The upper elements is this Book of Samurai that I'm doing, this series. It's about the tactics, the 8 Chinese formations, when to retreat, where do you put your blocking troops in, how do you line them up, that type of thing. And then, of course, it goes to psychology later on. And it's just massive.
So when we're looking at these old scrolls, for example, Natori Ryu, right? Is that the school, or is that an actual person?
No, so Natori Ryu. So Ryu means school. Okay. But be careful when you're, for example, in Street Fighter 2, you've got Ryu, but it's actually that kanji means dragon. Okay. So they're 2 separate ideograms, but same pronunciation. Yeah. So Ryu means school, but it actually is made up of the ideogram for water, meaning flow. So it means traditions that flow from. So, for example, Katori Shinto Ryu is a very famous sword school in Japan, and that means the traditions that flow from the temple Katori, or the shrine, from Katori. Whereas Nato-Ryu was a family. So Nato-Ryu was a family in the 1500s, and they served one of the most famous generals in Japan. And then they went on to serve the Shogun's family in Japan, and they taught their warfare to the next generation for over 300 years.
Jeez.
In fact, the family still exists to this day, and they give me their blessing to reopen this and publish it and teach from these scrolls.
Wow, that's amazing.
Which is excellent. Yeah, it was pretty good at.
That's awesome. So when you're kind of going through these scrolls, what condition are they in? What's that process like? I know you said you put a team together. I'm kind of transitioning here a little bit, but you put a team together to kind of go through and translate these things. What is that process like? I mean, in terms of just going through each scroll and trying to understand what is being said in there from an ancient context.
Yeah, it's close. So the way I got this done is, I will be honest now, my Japanese is terrible, but I realized this straight away is I am nowhere near good enough. Because when I was an English teacher and I'm trying to find the history of the ninja, I found some books with pictures of ninja scrolls in. So I photocopied them, blew them up, and gave them out to my Japanese students. Yeah. And they said, it's too old, Anthony. It's like reading Old English. It's too hard. And we can't do it. The vocab is totally different, if you like. But I gave one to Yoshie, who's now my translation partner, and she's the one who did the degree in old translation. Yeah. So what we did then is we literally tracked all the libraries down. And so for Nato-Ryu, we found 3 public collections with the scrolls in. And we had to piece everything together to get every name of all the scrolls that were across, the entire school. And we're actually missing 2. And recently I went to Japan to track down, and I only found half of a missing one. So what we do is we get 3 copies, or however many. The most we've ever found is 3 of one. And we will start going through each one, and she'll put the basics down in English, really basic. And then what I have to do is go through and say, well, actually, what do you mean here? And are you sure? And that doesn't match this, or, and then let's look at the actual word. So, for example, the word kashira, is it captain, which means leader? Mm-hmm. Is it captain? Is it sergeant? Is it lieutenant? Which do you put it into? And then a show, is it a general or is it a commander-in-chief? So that's like just one example of 2 words, and we have to go through them all.
And what I liked about the book that you sent over is that you kind of talk about some of those things in the book. I mean, you kind of say like, here's in parentheses or out to the side, like here's this is what it could mean, sort of, right? Here's some, almost like footnotes, but it's in line with the text, and so it's helpful as you're kind of reading that to go, okay, this kind of applies it could apply at this level of command, it could apply at this other level of command, or whatever the case is. So I think it's really helpful, and it's very transparent in terms of like. Bibles, for example, we do that now. We didn't always do that before, but there's a lot of footnotes in the Bibles that are more recent, right? Where we talk about, we say, well, this actually wasn't included in previous manuscripts, but we're going to put it in here just because we're not sure, or it could be translated this way or translated that way. So I think that's really helpful.
And it's also there's a lot of researchers out there who can read Japanese and like, okay, and it does make it an easier read for everyone, I think.
Yeah. Is there anyone today that is practicing samurai in some kind of art form that's similar to what was done in the ancient days?
I am probably going to create a lot of enemies here and say no.
Okay.
No, I don't believe there are. There are lots of people who have been passed down samurai traditions, and they are real passed down samurai traditions. But for example, one of the best examples I can think of is in the text. It talks about attacking with groups of 3. So it says, when you go into a battle, create promises between 3 of you. The first one will spar straight off with the enemy. The second one defends the outer circle, so he won't let anybody get involved. And the third one creeps up behind and knifes the guy and kills him. And if you do that 3 times, you capture 3 different heads. Yet there's nothing like that being taught today. Yeah. By any of the skills. It's all very much dueling samurai from later periods.
Well, and sure, I mean, and not only that, but then the upbringing, the brutality, right? The introduction to death at an early age and how to kill and stuff like that. That's not happening, right? So we know we don't have. I mean, if it is happening, then we don't have cameras over there talking about it. But
I promise you, Japan is nothing like that. This is just really. It looks good on the pictures, but they're just very nice, and they're businessmen really who've come home from work and they go and do swordsmanship. Most of them, that's what it is.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I imagine the world's a better place for that, and that we can read about these things in the past. Well, this has been just an excellent conversation. I know there's a lot of things we could talk about. I'm really looking forward to the next books, and actually I want to pick up the first book as well in the series. How can people get in touch with you to find out more and just kind of follow you along on this process, on this journey of uncovering these scrolls and translating and coming out with the next book and all of that?
I really would love it, guys, if you did sort of follow me. The best thing to do is find Antony Cummins on YouTube. I put videos up all the time, or Natori Ryu on YouTube. The other one I'm on is on Instagram, which is @historicalninja or @Natori Ryu. But I'll give you my website. It's www.natori.co.uk. That's NATORI.co.uk.
All right, that's awesome. And for the guys who are listening to the podcast, we'll make it easy for you as well. Just head over to wolfandiron.com/samurai. wolfandiron.com/samurai. We'll put the show notes for this episode there, along with all the links to get in touch with Antony and to kind of follow along. Yeah, you do have a really good YouTube presence, and so you're really rocking it out there, so that's great. Well, sir, this has been a fantastic conversation. I know the guys are just stimulated by this conversation because of all the, just talk of warfare and samurai. And it does bring up that whole like 90s and stuff, the kind of feeling of like, man, these guys were awesome. I want to read more about them and understand them. So thank you so much for being here. Just great talking to you.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Well, there you have it, men. I'd love to know what you thought about the episode. Feel free to reach out to me on any of my social media networks. And look, if you got something out of this, make sure another guy does too. Share the episode and make sure it gets in front of the guys that need to hear it the most. Until next time, keep your powder dry, and may a fair wind be always in your sails.